Okay. So, yes, 30 plus years of teaching parenting. I've had many different occasions to do this in multiple different venues, whether it's counseling opportunities or in a family resource center, a pregnancy care center, young moms groups, whatever it is. I've worked with them, multiple at-risk parents, as well as parents who had education far exceeding mine. And they all have one common truth that I want to share with you. No one does it right every time. Okay? No one does it right every time. I think we were all much better parents before we had kids. You know, we thought we knew what we were doing. We were equipped in that regard. Well, when you think about parenting, you come into it with a history of, everybody has a history of their own because we were parented. Imprinted on our hearts already is the blueprint of our childhood, and we are blueprinting our children. If we revert back to what we know, even if it's not what we know that we will revert back to what we know, even if it's not what we want for our children, unless we are intentional. So intentional is what I hope to speak about because it's foundational from the Bible. It is a Christian worldview. But before we start that, I've got to say multiple times, you'll probably hear me say, don't do the guilt. Okay? Don't regret your own childhood. Don't regret the parenting that you were given, and don't regret the childhood that you have already created for your child. Being intentional will have benefits regardless of where you are on this journey. And it is a journey. It's not a quick fix. It's an intentional journey. So tonight I'm going to give you, if you didn't pick it up, there's a list of 10 things, and they're intentional parenting actions that we're going to cover as we talk. They're supported by Scripture, they're grounded in faith, and I'm going to give you examples of what they should look like in our home. Also, I've never presented parenting that the biggest part of the discussion ended with discipline. So I know that's a big topic, and that's where we'll probably end up with more questions. And regardless, I'm going to move the discipline to the end so that we'll have an opportunity to answer your questions. So what kind of parent do you want to be? Or what kind of parent did you want to be when you were parenting? Give me some ideas.
Loving.
Loving? Okay.
Patient.
Patient. Good. Good. Understanding. Okay. Involved. Good. Great words. All right. What about your child now? What do you hope for your child to be? What's your end game? Keep them out of jail?
Love the Lord.
Love the Lord. Absolutely. She's being all good, and I'm throwing in those side things. And keep them out of jail. Sorry. Okay, what else? What else do you want for your kids? Hello. To be forgiving? To teach them to be forgiving? Yes, good.
Free from addictions.
Awesome. These are big things, big responsibilities as parents. Another take-home for you is a list of 5 things that most parents want. To display confidence, to express character, have strong convictions. A lot of what you're saying fits into this. To show compassion and to become competent. And all of those through the lens of knowing Jesus as Lord. Well, over the years, I think it's hilarious that the way that parenting styles, naming the parenting styles have changed. At one time, it was a helicopter parent. Do you remember that? Free-range parent, new age parent, attachment parenting, gentle parenting is big right now, eggshell parenting, and then I heard one on the way over here tonight, safety net parenting. Who does this? Who writes this? You know, it's kind of like nail polish. Who has the job of naming those colors? Well, that's what it feels like when it comes to parenting. There's so many options and so many different theories. Even the American Psychological Association has identified 4 types of parenting. Now, this is a secular entity, but at the same time, it's interesting to see what they have to say about this. Parenting styles: permissive, authoritarian, neglectful or uninvolved, and authoritative. So what they tell us is that if it's authoritarian parent, the mistake that the child makes will usually lead to a punishment. So the children grow up being fearful. Okay, that's not our best option. They have poor self-esteem. They're very concerned about rules and worried about punishment. Then the permissive parent, on the other hand, they have no rules. So that child ends up growing up with being impulsive and demanding and an expectation that's beyond anything that can be filled. And also their self-regulation is sort of off because there's such permissiveness. Then you have the uninvolved parent. And as you can imagine, trouble controlling emotions. There's difficulty with maintaining social relationships. There's all kinds of things that would happen. But the Psychological Association recommends this authoritative parenting. And I'm just going to read you some of their words. Normally, this would develop a close, nurturing relationship between the parent and the child. You would have clear guidelines for expectations. Disciplinary methods would be used as a way to support your child, not punish them. This parenting style leads to the healthiest outcomes for children. Also, these children are confident, responsible, and able to self-regulate. So it's interesting to see, even from a secular view, that the intentional parenting that we're going to talk about tonight fits into their most optimal style as well. So one thing you need to have if you're going to be an intentional parent is the strong belief that you are the most important person in your child's life. You are the greatest influence in your child. It's essential because if you don't believe that, then you will imagine it is the culture, it's the church, it's their grandparents, it's the school. Well, it really isn't. All studies show that kids of all ages are influenced and shaped and molded more by their parents than any other resource, any other kind of influence on their life. So consider, you have been called to be a parent. It's a significant part of your destiny and life purpose. Becoming an intentional parent will be one of the most important actions you will ever undertake. Believing you are vital to the health and development of your child is the first step. Okay, back to what do we want to be and what do we want our children to be, looking at this from that perspective. When you recognize this strong belief that you are the most influential person in your child's life, personally, I believe you cannot own that until you know the lordship of Jesus Christ in your own life. And in able to do that, there must be in a relationship with Him to equip you. We all know probably the Deuteronomy 6:5-8 that says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength." Talks about these commandments being pressed upon our children. Impress them on our children. And talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, or when you get up. I remember reading this to my kids and saying, okay, when am I supposed to be telling you about Jesus? All the time. Okay, this is true. So it isn't just on Sunday they get a Bible verse or every night they get to pray. It is part of your language and your conversation and your direction with your children that you are telling them about what the Bible says, what the Lord says. These scriptures instruct us to not only obey, but to have that relationship with the Lord. And faith conversations must be validated by our lifestyle. We can tell our children over and over that Jesus makes a difference in our life, but if they don't see that difference in our life, they will not believe it. Kids do not need us to be a perfect parent or a spiritual giant. Actually, the perception of perfection might intimidate them and create insecurity. They need to see that we love the Lord and we want to walk with Him. We want to get to know Him better. Okay, the second action is to be a role model. Intentional parents understand that their children learn from them and they are their primary role model. There's no question that your child is going to see everything you do. You think that they're not, but your life is on display. If you are a parent, your life is on display. Children are always watching and learning. I would have to say this too about kids that are in our classrooms, and they're also watching us. What they might be watching are how you think, how you treat others, when you pray, how you talk about those who are hurting, how you talk about those who are hurting you, how you respond to finances, how do you make decisions, how often you eat, what you eat. They're going to be watching. How consumed are you with social media? How important is your phone? How you prioritize anything, everything. How do you prioritize? They're watching. How you drive. I didn't ever like this one. How you reconcile conflict. How you handle your money. Whether you embellish, exaggerate, or fabricate your conversations. They're watching. Also, what do you do in your free time? Your kids are watching. I don't think, again, I want to go back to don't be perfect. We can't be, for one thing. But the strive to be perfect is really defeating. It's defeating for us, and it's not the best for your child. If they grow up thinking that you are perfect and they can't ever meet that mark, then it does create a huge crash and a fall and a low self-esteem and many worries. So, again, let them know your struggles in a child-appropriate way, but also let them see you, let them catch you doing all those things that you know that they're watching. And give them insight into why you watch this or why you listen to this, or let them know. One of the biggest, I think, is encouraging words. That probably is number 3 on your outline. Is it? Okay, good. I'm right on target then. Number 3, encouraging words. Intentional parents regularly use words that are positive and life-giving. Encouragement is one of our deepest cravings. That's all children, all adults. How do you know if your child needs encouragement? They're breathing. Okay. Words hold much more power than we ever want to admit. Words are powerful. They're can't get them back once you've said them. We remember words that are pointed and positive, but we also remember the words that are sharp and negative. The human brain processes physical and emotional pain in a very similar way. This means that negative words literally hurt and cause pain, and our brains perceive little difference. Physical wounds leave scars, but so do emotional wounds. It's easy to see how, if you think back to your own childhood, I do this with the kids in the counseling. I'll say, tell me something that someone said that made you feel good. They're quick, they're able to talk about it. And sometimes it's, even for kids, it might be something that happened a year ago or 2 years ago. Maybe it was not a parent, but a coach or someone who said something. And then I'll say, how about, can you remember when someone hurt your feelings, or hurt you with words? Same thing. It goes right to the quick. It could be last year. It could be 2 years ago. They still remember it. Sometimes it's sarcasm, and that's said sort of in a joking way, and yet at the same time, it's hurtful. An example would be, oh gosh, I'm so glad you showed up. At least you're here 10 minutes late instead of 30. Okay, that's very sarcastic. Name calling is another way that we do not want to teach our children or to be this, because we don't want to say, I can't believe you acted like whomever or whatever, calling them a name. And then disgust. If we have a face of disgust and we're speaking to them in disgust, they're going to remember it. Also, shaming. I just encourage you to, if you're doing this, even in your head, go to the Lord in prayer and reword how you want to speak to your child. There's also misguided words, and this one I don't think parents recognize, because we're very quick to defend our children. And maybe in a situation where your child will not step up and speak, you might say, oh, he's just shy. Well, that makes the child recognize that there is a deficit. That's what they first think. Okay, something's wrong with me. Maybe you say, well, she's always awkward. Or, he's just not very athletic. Or she's not good with people. These kind of things, even though, yes, they may be true and you might be working on them, said in front of a child can be very harmful. Someone told me the other day that they were talking to a parent of preteens, and the teen mother said, oh, just wait, and this was in front of the kids, just wait till you get those middle of the night calls when they're teenagers. Well, the preteens did not have any form of reference for that. The two moms laughed, and yet the child went away thinking, what's going to happen to me? What's wrong, and what is the situation? So you never know exactly how it's going to be interpreted, so you have to consider that before you say that. Words accompanied by negative modifiers infiltrate a child's mind and their heart, and it's not uncommon for the child to feel the way that you are describing. Maybe they didn't think they were shy, and you described them as shy. Words have the ability to shape them in negative ways, but they also have the ability to shape them in positive ways. Does anybody want to share an example of a time that someone really said something that was quick and hurting, or something that was positive and that you've remembered all these years?
Not in a negative way.
Okay. No, either.
Because I would say in a positive way. I can remember being 10 years old and a teacher that encouraged me and said that I was a bright student, and that if she would switch my seat or something like that, she knows that I would do so much better. And she did, and I did much better.
That's awesome. Yeah.
My grades just really went up because of that encouragement.
That's great. One of my son's teachers in about that same age told me in front of him, if I ever have kids, I hope to have one like your son. And that's a huge compliment to me, but to him, just the idea that, that was very exciting for my son to hear. This is one that has stuck with me for a long time because I know this child, and the mother spoke over and over to her little boy, girls are so much easier. Well, by the time this kid was 15, 16, he wanted to be a girl. Another one, a future business leader who lived for her father's approval, told the story of how she made straight A's and so proud, went to tell her dad about it, and his first comment was, well, you only made all A's because that school is so easy. And very cutting and very, very harmful. And the woman that told the story was in her 60s, and this happened in childhood. Still staying with her. Another one, a mom said to her teenager, I don't really think you should go to college because you're just average. Her son went on to college. He received a doctorate at one of the Ivy League schools and became a very well-known professor. Another one that we say sometimes, I wish you were more like your brother, or can you do this like your sister? And maybe we're trying to encourage them, but at the same time, that could be negative. That could be very hurtful. Another one is, especially in families that are separated or mom and dad are not seeing eye to eye, you might hear, gosh, you're just like your dad. Okay, we want that to be a positive. We don't want that to be spoken in anger or disappointment. But then again, the words spoken in encouragement, honestly, we can turn it around almost every time to be able to share with them in a way that would be encouraging. I also want to preface that if you did not grow up in a home where encouraging words were modeled, it's going to be difficult. It's a hard task to change. It could be challenging, just like learning a foreign language. How do I redo this? So becoming an encouraging parent or an encouraging adult requires discipline and focus. It requires hard work and intention. You must have intention. But I just encourage you tonight, don't allow your past to define your future. Make it different. Your words are so powerful. And we talked about your end game and what you want your children to be over time. Well, your words matter. If you want your child to be confident, compassionate, have character, conviction, we know that those kind of actions come from a good heart. And that's another resource for you. Matthew 12:35 says, a good person produces good words from a good heart, and an evil person produces evil words. So everything powerful and good within relationships has a direct relationship to one's heart. A new heart or a renewed heart might be needed to speak to your child. And again, there's no technique, there's no plan to make that happen. There's not a new relationship strategy, but I believe you miss the bigger picture if you don't allow God to love you dearly and to read His words into your own heart and see that that's how He feels about you. Don't skip that truth that He rejoices over us and He wants to know us and to love us. Okay, moving on. Genuine affection. Following closely with the action of encouraging words would be genuine affection. The strongest link, this is, I did multiple research. I wanted to be able to give you some statistics of if you do this, this happens. And if this is in your home, then this happens. Well, they're not really out there like that. And I guess it's because it's a difficult thing to measure. How well is your child doing? How successful? I do have a few that are from a secular viewpoint again of what kind of home would foster the greatest successful adults. But regardless, it is a link between children's physical well-being and emotional health. The biggest link that has been determined is overall happiness and time spent with family. So, it shouldn't be a surprise that you benefit your children by your affection to them. Studies for decades have revealed that affection actually assists in shaping a child's brain. Ray, I didn't write this down, but remember how many minutes or seconds the hug? It's, if we just do a quick hug, we get a little bit of comfort, but a real hug gives us more. How many?
20 seconds.
20 seconds. And what we gain from that is more empowerment and the ability to, it's physiological as well as physical and emotional. In babies, the part of the brain that's involved in controlling emotions, paying attention, and expressing empathy is not developed at birth, but it is developed by their environment and the opportunity for us to hug, cuddle, touch, nurture. And if that doesn't happen, the deficit of that is an emotional imbalance. So we talk a lot about trying to make our children successful. Kissing and cuddling a 3-year-old is more likely to make them an academic genius at 18 than introducing them to the alphabet at age 3. Affection is actually essential to cognitive development. It raises IQ. We've got grandbabies. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to this. So, affection is essential to cognitive development. That's your brain. We're working on your brain here. In fact, cuddling raises IQ. Loving touch is the number one tool for success throughout childhood and beyond. Love and affection have been found to increase the volume of the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for learning and memory. Another thing that goes along with genuine affection is minimizing the introduction of stress. Okay. I've had the opportunity to talk with some parents recently about what is stress for a child. And in this environment, stressors are so much different than they were when we were in elementary school or when you were in high school, or it's a different culture, for one thing. Social media has created greater stressors. There's concern. I think the pandemic had a lot to do with stressors that are causing for young children. Minimizing stress does not mean that you are going to eliminate those factors from your child's life. It means that you are going to accompany them through their stressful times. Okay, that's the biggest indicator of success for a child who's involved in any kind of stress. The later our children are exposed to stress, the better for their brain and their overall mental health. Delayed encounters of stress equate to stronger resilience. You think, in some ways, that's counter to what you think because, okay, the more they learn about stress, the better they will learn to manage it. But it's actually the opposite. The later they learn about stress, the more life skill, the more opportunities that they've had to experience a stressful situation and learn how to handle it. So it's much better to delay stress. In a child, stress looks different than it does in an adult. We have the words, and we might be able to say, I feel so stressed because XYZ. A child does not have that vocabulary. And you guys that work with kids, what do children say?
I'm tired.
Okay, I'm tired is a big one.
My head hurts.
My head hurts.
My stomach hurts.
My stomach hurts. Anything else?
You might just throw a tantrum or get angry or
Yes, yes, they throw a tantrum. They are angry. I read this somewhere, and I can't contribute it to the author because I don't know, but a child cannot say, talk to me, or I need you, but they might say, will you play with me after a long, stressful moment or day, or so they are experiencing the stress, but they don't have the vocabulary. So regardless, it's our attention, our love, our interaction, our comfort that is going to buffer that stress. C.S. Lewis said, children are not a distraction from the more important work. They are the important work. Another one regarding stress, the authors that I read most talk about if your child, especially this would be the teen years, if they're not receiving the comfort and the touch at home, then they're going to find it somewhere else. And this is certainly a caution for us because we want their safety place to be at home. Those that have experienced physical love and warmth from their parents show higher self-esteem, better communication skills, and fewer psychological and behavioral problems. It's a given. We know it. But to hear it out loud reminds us again how important it is. Insufficient affection will lead to feelings of alienation, hostility, aggression, lower self-esteem, antisocial behavior, and even risky behaviors. It's interesting to look at the stats of the risky behaviors for young adults and teens and then go back and see what their journey was up to that point, and that's where some of this data comes from. Also, if we have teens in our home and preteens, it's really easy for us as parents to start withdrawing from the affection and the more cuddling and sitting on your lap and all of that because they are getting bigger and they are teens, and they will say, leave me alone, or I don't want you to do that, or don't touch me, but that's actually a time for us to press in. The affection and the way that we're touching may have to change. At one time it was a big hug. Now it may be a fist pump. It might be a shoulder, bump. It might be side by side, but it doesn't mean to discontinue the affection physically. And when we do recognize that from them, and I know fathers and daughters and moms and sons, sometimes they struggle with, okay, what does this look like now? Well, continue and find something that does work. I want to give you an example of a child that I worked with that had not been touched. And so this is the extreme of me talking to you about, continuing touch and affection. This child was born with a twin sister who grew to be very beautiful, and he was very small and had a deformity on his face. The sister was always picked up and hugged and cuddled, and the little boy was not. There was a fracture in the family, lots of things going on, and by the time he was 11, he was so angry that he had been expelled from school. And my job was to help him titrate from an inpatient setting to an outpatient setting in a mental health facility. I started off the very first day, he would not let anyone touch him. Okay, that was the very first rule, don't touch me. And we were in a group setting, and I was working with my hands with each of the children. And as I would go from one to the other, these kids had been more familiar with touch. And so they were, we were intertwined and things were happening. I would, get in their space, they'd get in mine, and we were building something. When it came his turn, the first thing that happened is I touched him and he jerked back. So I continued on. The next day we were doing a similar activity. He was going to be there for 5 days. And so the next day I had the opportunity to do it again, trying to get this child just comfortable with being touched. Pulled his hand away. The third day, I'm putting my hand up like this, and he's putting his up as close as he could get. It's like he was dying for the touch, but didn't know how to do that. So we moved towards that. By the end of his 3 weeks, it was 3 weeks, 5 days, 3 days, 2 days, his mom came in and remarkable change, and just commenting on how happy he looked and what is going on. And then the little boy started crying, and she's like this, and I said, you need to hug him. You would think that would just be your normal reaction, but this had been a child that had not been hugged. You need to hug him. Sure enough, that was the beginning of a new mother-son relationship. Okay. And helping her understand the stress that she had placed this child in and the torment that had happened. It's one of those cases where I'd love to be able to say, guess what happened to him? I have no idea. But I wish I knew. Because we sent him back to school with a smile and the ability to bump up against people without a reaction. You're not going to have that sort of situation, but I think it speaks to the volume of when you do get to touch your child and how important it is and what they need. Us with sacrifice. It requires us to sacrifice our time, our first place in our family. We have to be able to recognize that the children need us, and that's part of our responsibility. I think consistency is probably the greatest key factor with presence. Consistency. In order to be present, parents know that they must make sacrifices and be there as often as possible. Your presence actually makes a statement, and it communicates that you care about your child's world. It sends the message that they matter to you and that you are willing to sacrifice for them. But your presence requires intentional actions. It means you have to plan, you have to strategize, you have to sacrifice, you have to initiate, you have to implement. It's hard work. Intentional parents must strongly believe that every yes they say to something outside of the family becomes a no to the family. And again, this is hard. We have jobs, we have lives, we have activities, but consider, and this is again, I'm just going to read it. Consider that you have your child in your home until their 18th birthday. That's not always true, but let's say at 18, you think your child is going to go away, going to grow up and fly the coop. Okay, that is 6,570 days, 936 weeks, and 216 months. I know. So, being present may be a challenge to your priorities. Being present means emotionally invested, responsive, and available. Again, I mentioned the strongest link between a child's well-being and happiness and contentment in that child is time spent with family. There's no shortcut. Think about your life, the things that you have said to your child. You are the soundtrack of their mind. They are hearing you. What do your children hear you say over and over and over? I mentioned that children aren't going to say, I've had a hard day, but they might say, would you play with me? If I asked my father when I was growing up to talk, this is really amazing when I look back now, because my father was a very busy man and I was one of 5 children. But if I said, Dad, I need to talk, he stopped what he was doing, put everything down, gave me his full attention, and probably said, shoot. But he looked at me as if whatever I was going to say could save a nation. He made me think whatever I had to talk about was the most important thing in the world. And I remember that from a young age and until I was an adult, always. So quite the gift of his presence. My children grew up with my husband traveling, and that would be several nights a week. But Bill made a real conscious effort to schedule his work travels around their activities. So when you ask my sons now, how much time was your dad away from home? I think he traveled some. They really do not have that understanding because he was so present when he was present. I think that's a big deal. You know, you hear a lot about quality versus quantity, but your presence, your consistent presence. Also, there's some things we need to ask ourselves. I read an article about why some of our children are misbehaving so early, and one of the things it alluded to is that if we are not giving our children our greatest attention, our full attention, when they're doing whatever they're doing, their everyday things, they're going to act out to get it, okay? So, because when they act up, or when they have a meltdown, or when they're, in chaos, or chaotic, or throwing a fit, whatever, tantrum, we do give them our full attention. So, they need that. What it's saying is, put your phone down. Turn off the computer. Engage in their play. Laugh with them. If you don't have a sense of humor as a parent, it's like an accountant who sucks at math. You have to have a sense of humor. You have to be able to do that. Also, if you are working and they're there, they need to know, obviously, that there are boundaries. There are times when they can interrupt and times when they shouldn't. But how present are you? Do they always think, my mom's here, but she's never available? Okay, that's the message you may be sending. Consider their perception, is my mom too busy for me? That's what we might be saying. And it's hard. I know that it's hard. But the concept of presence is throughout the Bible. This isn't mine. I haven't developed it, and even the people writing our parenting literature did not develop this. God did. When you think about the presence of God in our lives, He desires our presence. He wanted us to be with Him in such a way that He allowed His Son to become human and die for us. I think His presence is what He desires. Our presence in His presence is what He desires from us. He says in Ephesians, or Paul says in Ephesians, I pray that from His glorious, unlimited resources, God will empower you with His inner spirit through His Spirit. So He wants us to be in His presence. And so the concept, again, is throughout the Bible. Any questions? Any comments? I haven't given you guys a chance for that very much. No? All right, then, in that case, be thinking about those questions because you are going to talk. Another action that I believe is very important for an intentional parent is a shelter from the storm, a peaceful home. Kids need a peaceful place to feel accepted and to recognize serenity, to be calm, somewhere where there is predictability, there's stability, there's the positivity for a child and a sense of security. Growth comes from that. Now, it doesn't mean a quiet home in that there is no one talking or nothing happening, but sort of a haven away from all that could be happening outside your home. They need to know that they're accepted there, that whatever they say or do is important to their parents and to their family. Children have to handle so much when it comes to their social life, their school life, the competitions that they're in, the pressure so much comparison is happening outside of our doors, so we want to make home a peaceful place. Because I want you to talk, tell me some of the things that you think would make your home peaceful.
If my kids weren't putting each other down all the time.
All right, no put downs. Yeah, if my kids are not putting each other down. Anybody else?
No yelling.
No yelling. Okay. No yelling. Okay. Anything else?
Like you said, an accepted place. So
An accepted.
somebody said something else funny. A lot of times you do that when you're sibling, so they'll say something ugly back, but
Yeah.
encouragement to
Yeah.
include and enjoy.
Good. Well, I did a list just of things that I think we could cover tonight. Discipline without screaming and yelling. Boundaries without unreasonable rules. Okay, we want to provide boundaries. We want to provide framework. And I use the word rules. It does not bother me, and I haven't asked my children if it bothered them. I know that it's this generation does not really care for that because it feels too constricting. I think that there are rules, and we should be able to say, this is our house rule, or this is our class rule. But I think we need to also help them understand that we have boundaries with reasonable rules, not unreasonable. Words of encouragement, like you said, rather than critical comments or put downs. A warm and consistent affection. They need to know that they can depend on you. If you're this way one time and that way the next time, it's going to be difficult for them to develop consistency. Also, parents who respect each other. Even if you are in a divided household, you can show respect for the other parent. You do not have to bash them. You do not have to degrade them. Also, kids need to see that in their home there is a freedom from being compared with siblings, with friends, with the older relative, any of that. Freedom from comparison, but also freedom from unrealistic expectations. If the expectation is so high and you know they can't meet it, then why have we set it? Because we want our children to be successful. We want them to win. In Colossians, I think it's 1 Colossians 1:20, through Jesus, God reconciled everything to himself. God made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. So to create a peace-filled home, we have to have a peace-filled heart, okay? And recognize that we are not to be anxious. You guys know the Philippians passage about not being anxious and to give our request to God and allow his peace to rule. So that's what we want in our homes. We want it to be a peaceful place. The next one is to activate responsibility. Intentional parents provide opportunities for their children to develop responsibility and pursue healthy independence. They're not born with a sense of responsibility. I like that that's an idea. That would be great. But they must be taught to develop it. And think through and assign. I think if a child is walking, let me rephrase that, walking, talking, able to respond to your voice, then they should have a chore. They should be able to help in the family. Okay? Age-appropriate chores should be connected to service and responsibilities. They should not be linked with consequences unless they don't do the chore. Then there would be a consequence. But if they choose irresponsibly, then yes, there's a consequence. But the chore shouldn't be the consequence. They should want to do the chore. It's not punishment, but it's part of being in a family. It's part of what we do, part of growing up. And I think this is true regardless of whether there is an economic need in your family or there is a reason beyond. I think the biggest reason can be that they are a part of a family and that this is the responsibility of being in the family. And again, child age-appropriate chores. Little toddlers can help with many things, folding, towels, or putting the toys away. I mean, there's so many little things that you can begin. And as they get older, of course, the responsibility should increase. And it should be an expectation. I mentioned consequences, and I said I wasn't going to until we got to the discipline part. But honestly, if they're not doing their chores and it's something that needs to be done for your family, then the consequence is that everyone is going to suffer, not that you are going to do the chore for them. Okay? A natural consequence is, oh, wow, we don't get XYZ because little Johnny didn't do his chores. Okay? There should be, don't bail your child out, in other words. Give them the responsibility and allow them to fail to perform it or to perform it to your expectations. Responsibility begins to be formed when the children are young and parents follow through with the clear consequences connected to clear tasks. If you don't have a boundary, you don't have the rules, you don't have chores, kids are left with this kind of, what do I do next? And what's happening? And why did she get mad? And I didn't know I was supposed to. Chances are they did know what they were supposed to, but be sure you're telling them very clear directions and giving them specific words. I think this is another one of those, the chore setting. It is never too late to start, okay? If you've got a teenager in the house and they've never been expected to do chores, start tonight. What fun. The child's ability to make the decisions and avoid consequences will build self-esteem. When your child learns that behaviors have consequences, he will also learn that he has the power to control his own decisions in life. This one, positive memories and serious fun. What can I say? Everything, there's a season. That's one of my verses, Ecclesiastes 3. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under the sun, a time to cry, a time to laugh, a time to grieve, and a time to dance. You need all of that in your family. The writer that I paid the most attention to these past few weeks talked about having vacations. And even if you couldn't afford the vacation, put the lawn chairs up and a kiddie pool and pretend. It's all about making the memories. To be honest, you are making memories every day. That's not what the choice is. The choice is, what kind of memories will your child gain? What will they remember? So you want to outweigh the negative memories with the positive memories. And I think memories are important to God too. He established the Sabbath. He set it aside that we would remember him as creator. He established feasts so that we'd remember that God is our provider. Communion, that we would remember what Jesus has done on the cross. And he commands us to remember his goodness and to pass it on, to share that. So spiritual memories are significant. Every kid needs to laugh and play and have fun. Part of a healthy life is having fun, is laughing, is enjoyment. This is another secular publication, Science Daily. They published an article on the connection between laughter and overall health. Quote, the best, again, this is from a secular viewpoint, but I think it's very interesting. The best clinicians understand that there is an intrinsic psychological intervention brought about by positive emotions such as laughter, optimism, and hope. Lifestyle choices have a significant impact on health and disease. We know that. So let's be intentional as parents to model and have a privilege to lead the fun in our family. Fun and happiness can be contagious. Laughter not only heals the body, it improves our outlook on life. So make your home a place where laughter is heard and is experienced, where it's valued and encouraged. Don't take yourself too seriously. Allow your children to laugh at you. Allow them to laugh at themselves. You need to grow that spirit. It's almost a given, too. We talked a little bit about if the children are not getting the affection at home, they'll look somewhere else. Well, this is true for fun. If you are always the nagging mom or the one who is pushing them away because they're not meeting your expectations. They're not going to want to be in your presence. So they're going to find it somewhere else. Live and understand what it means to live abundantly. Again, it requires dancing, laughing, and having the joy of the Lord. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit of discipline. And not only discipline, but what consequences look like and how maybe you could set up your own structure. But before we do that, let's go back and look at your questions. What specific fears do you have? Some of you are in the midst of this big parenting journey. So what are your fears right now? And as grandparents, we look at it from a different perspective. But what are you thinking about? What's making you fearful about parenting? Contributing and functional society members. How about you guys? Got any fears back there?
That they're learning bad habits.
Okay. Learning bad habits. Well, along with the bad habits, they're learning the good ones too. So, anybody else? Do you have any fears?
I nothing's new under the sun, right? And so I think I fear some of the ways in which the enemy lies to our children, and they can become addicted to things that you didn't necessarily do.
Okay.
They'll find it out there.
I worry about society, what society is doing with the kids,
Okay.
the culture they're living in.
Mm-hmm. And over and over tonight, we just repeat the fact that you are the greatest influence on those kids. Even though, yes, the culture has a big part, and our responsibility of what we let in, what we allow them to view, what we allow them to listen to, is big. I mean, that's a big responsibility, and that's a boundary I think we have to set. I think it's part of the expectation, and it doesn't rule it all out, and that's the other reason why I think all of these verses and all of this information about the heart is so important, because you want your child to have that kind of heart, that they desire to do what's right in the sight of the Lord. All right, and we talked a little bit about qualities that you want your child to possess. Any thoughts about that after hearing all of this information about intentional parenting?
Be resilient.
Resilient, okay. What qualities do you want your children to possess? I thought I would share with you, when I counsel here at school, I have about 7 things that are always in the back of my mind for the children. Self-confidence is one. I want these kids to know what it is like to believe in themselves. I want them to have a strength, a character of empathy. Self-control is a big part of what we do. Integrity. Even curiosity. I want them to wonder, and I try to ask them questions to build their curiosity. I want them to be able to persevere, back to resiliency. I do as much on resiliency as probably anything else, and this goes along with regardless of what their diagnosis or their behavior issue has been. They have to be resilient in this culture. Optimism is another one. This one goes with looking on the bright side and, all of those that we talked about tonight as far as encouraging words and being able to set a calm environment. That all goes along with some of those characteristics, and optimism is a big part of that. Does that surprise you, or do you see that list as something, oh, yeah, that's... Okay. Any other qualities that you want your children to have? Joy. Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
Just that contentment.
Yeah, contentment and joy. Good.
The ability to compromise.
Okay, that's good. That's being taught. That's another one that you're probably teaching every day and you don't even know it because you and your husband have to compromise. If it's like my house, multiple times a day. Like, when are we doing this and when are we doing that and how long are we staying and, all of those things. So they're seeing some of that. All right, I do want to ask you just a little bit to give me some idea of where the biggest challenges are. You said this is what you want for your kid, but do you see the biggest challenge as being the culture, or is it being the inability to control their arguments between them? Is it more about the pressures? I mean, what's the biggest challenge right now? It's the culture. And are you just thinking the way it's getting into your child's life?
Yeah, the way that, because it's their friends and.
Okay.
I mean, my particular child at home is doing a pretty good job with it, but it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Abby?
I would say for me and for our kids, it's the sibling interactions.
Okay.
Just very challenging dynamic
Okay.
with the personalities and that sort of thing. There are other things, but I would say in terms of, when you talk about a peaceful home.
Yeah.
If we could just get a hang on the way that they interact with each other, I
Okay.
think we could see some amazing difference there. But that's what it is for us.
Okay. When we go through this aspect of discipline, listen for ways that you might interject changes in what the kids are doing. And one of my tools when I'm working with parents is to say, use a third party to go home to your kids and say, I learned this tonight at the seminar, or I read this last night in the Bible, or the preacher said, throw another party in there and give it some weight and have what you want to tell them to be specific. And it would have specific expectations, very specific boundaries, and then very specific consequences. And then be willing to follow that up, okay? So we're not talking about a behavior necessarily, but when you start talking about behavior, it has to be specific. So let's look at what the Bible says about discipline, and then I hope I give you a little tool that maybe can help you. Discipline really is a sign of love. You can't fully love your child if you don't provide discipline. Love and discipline must go together. Both are acts of genuine care and concern. And in Hebrews 12:6, for the Lord disciplines those he loves. So if the Lord is disciplining us because he loves us, we should in turn be disciplining our children because we love them. Intentional parents discipline because they want their children to grow up to become competent, thoughtful, where's our list, adults who possess the ability to make good decisions. True? Yeah, it's true. Ephesians says, don't scold and nag your children, making them angry and resentful. Rather, bring them up with the loving discipline the Lord approves. Okay, so what does this look like? I'll share some examples and also just, again, walk through the text here of what this looks like. And then we're going to, if you're interested, we can do some role play. If not, I'll just keep talking. Intentional parents learn to discipline without anger. So I'm begging you, don't discipline in anger. I'm not suggesting that you're never going to get angry. I mean, all day, every day, multiple times a day. But don't discipline in anger. That means don't explode, don't yell, smack, or yank. Okay? All these behaviors are psychologically wounding to your child. If you discipline in anger, you're going to have a result of embarrassment, humiliation, even violence. Studies reveal that angry discipline produces what kind of kids? Angry kids. Do we want angry kids? It wasn't on anyone's list. No, we do not want angry kids. When you're screaming and yelling at them, kids don't necessarily hear what you're saying, but they do hear your spirit. When they see you lose control, they lose respect. Okay? Another way to paraphrase that Ephesians verse, don't keep scolding making them angry, and do not exasperate them, but teach them and train them with good suggestions and godly advice. Our bodies are fragile, but your spirits are even more fragile. So, to make the decision before the incident, stay calm. I tell people you can't de-escalate. An escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child. You have to be calm. You have to be the calmest person in the room. You have to make that decision. You have to stay with it. You are working to be wise with the discipline. It's not off the cuff. It's something you've determined beforehand. You've set the boundaries. The boundary has been broken. There must be a discipline intervention. There must be a consequence. You have to commit to the consequence long before the discipline is needed. You also have to commit to the consequence regardless of what your child does. I've seen this happen. The child will break the rule. The father will or mother will remind them of the consequence, and the child will melt in a puddle of boo-hooing. I didn't mean to. And the consequence is gone. Okay, the child has learned he can break the rule, and he doesn't have a consequence. Okay. As a parent, I want to remind you this, you're in control. You are the boss. You don't have to provide the discipline immediately, which means you have time to calm down. If that's where you are, you can choose to cool off, and you can choose not to respond in anger. So this little trick, it's not a trick, but it is an idea that has helped, and it's had decades of work, so it's not mine originally, but it's effective for children who are old enough to reason. I don't know if we have any children in here who are not. Our grandbabies might not be, but children that are old enough to reason is, 2.5, 3? Okay, but prior to that, it's a different kind of discipline, and I'm not going to go into it since none of us are faced with it right this minute. So we're going to talk about the discipline that's effective for children who are old enough to reason, okay? It's called discipline by choice, and it involves a fair consequence that is clearly communicated ahead of time, and it's connected to the offense. Okay, the goal of the consequence is not to punish. It is not to get revenge. Have any idea what the goal of the consequence might be? To teach. Okay, to help the child better understand the connection between choices and results. This is life, guys. You have choices, you make choices, and you get results. Okay? Clearly communicating ahead of time means that you don't surprise your child with consequences. You don't make them up on the spot. You don't, in the heat of the battle, say, "Oh, I am so sorry, but you are not going to Johnny's today." If you come at it from a position of impulse or anger, it is not going to fit. The consequence is not going to fit the behavior. So you might say to them, if you choose to, okay, give me something that's going on with the siblings.
Name call.
Okay, if you choose to call your sibling a name, then I want to be clear that your choice will result in, what's a typical punishment at your house, or a consequence, not punishment?
Computer taken away.
Okay, if you choose to call your sister a name, then I want to be clear that your choice will be no screen time tomorrow, or reduce it. You know, you got to make this fit the crime again, okay? But if you choose to do that, then here is your consequence. Another one might be if you choose to go to school without your homework, then your choice will result in a 0 for that day. That means when they call you on the phone and say, Mom, I forgot my homework, you say, I'm sorry. You don't run it to them, okay? Say they forgot their lunchbox. How many times this has happened in the history of children? Okay, if you choose to forget your lunchbox, then you have chosen to not eat lunch today. It's harsh. It feels harsh, those of us who, oh, please let me feed you kind of thing. But at the same time, it's a natural consequence. It should not be. That was the boundary. That was the rule. Okay, worked with a family recently, and their child was climbing on the furniture. He would pull the chair wherever he wanted to go and climb. And I said, in your house, that may not be a rule. It may not matter. But in my house, that would be a rule. The rule would probably be you don't move furniture. Or you don't climb, okay? So if you choose to climb, then I want you to understand that your choice is you will not play with XYZ, whatever it is. So what you're doing, the consequence actually becomes the child's choice, because they know ahead of time, if they choose this, then here's the consequence. Does this make sense? Give me some other behaviors that are happening, and let's see if we can sort of flesh this out.
One child is in the other's room teasing the child.
Okay.
Like going in the other child's room.
All right. So then the boundary at your house is she can't go in that room? Okay.
Without asking the sibling.
All right. So there you go. If you choose to go in your brother's room without asking, you will tell me something that might work for him or her.
Lose a toy for a day.
Okay. Then that toy will not be yours today. And then, can you take it away? Yeah. Yeah, you can. You have to. You take it away for a day or whatever you set it up. This is something that husbands and wives, moms and dads, you have to get together on, because as they get older, let's say the consequence is that they miss curfew. They have to be home we had a ridiculous curfew at my house, and my kids, bless their hearts, they were so obedient. Yes, Mom. Well, let's say it's 10. Okay, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, and beforehand, you have chosen that if you miss curfew, if they don't get home by curfew, then they will be grounded for the weekend. They will have no social activities for the weekend. They can do everything with the family, but nothing with a friend. Okay, you got it? So, 10:15 rolls around and they're not home. And of course, as a mom or a dad, we're sort of panicking, because they knew that they should be home. Now, I didn't have the access to cell phones when my kids were growing up that you do now, so you can almost know where they are. You can text them and all of that. But let's just say you're depending on him to get home. He gets home at 10:20. And first of all, you're glad he's safe, right? We're all glad he's safe. So you might say that. I'm so glad that you're safe. I was beginning to worry, and I'm also very sorry that because you chose to ignore your curfew, that you won't be able to go out with your friends this weekend. Okay? There's no yelling. There's no shaming. He made the choice, right? Okay. What do you think? Can it work?
Yes, but it's prom.
Okay, so it's prom. All right. So what are you going to do? It is tough. I don't know. There's grace in every situation. There has to be. But those are the times where, in my mind, every weekend is going to be something. And so I think if we start at the younger ages with the consequence being effective and working and consistent is so big. Because truly, if you don't follow through with the consequence, you are helping them to learn it doesn't matter. I get to do what I want to do. So the consequence should not be pleasant. So maybe in that case, you get to go to prom until 10 o'clock. You give a little, and yet, I'm sorry, but you made the choice. And so, now this is not going to work if you have a defiant runaway at 18 that you don't know where he is. There are many times this will not work because things have happened and there have been fractured relationships, obviously, and you kind of have to go back to the beginning, and that's another That's another conversation. That's another seminar. Also, if you are in a divided home, if there's two parents, these are hard. They can still work, but there's a little bit more finesse that has to go into that. And again, that was not part of tonight's explanation.
So I have a question.
Okay, question.
Obviously, today we have cell phones, and I would expect my child to call me and give me a heads up. Say he came home at 10:20 because he was helping his friend with a flat tire or something like that.
Okay,
Trying to do something good,
okay.
but he also knows his consequence that he had to be home. Or
He's supposed to be. I would say if he did call you and say that at 10 o'clock, then you could make the choice whether he was allowed to help his friend or not. If he didn't tell you anything at all and he came in at 10:20, even though he was helping the friend and he had a cell phone, I would count that as you get the consequence. But, and maybe that's harsh, but, the bottom line, the deal is you are home at 10 o'clock. Okay, if he knew he wasn't going to be, then cell phones are awesome for that. Did he call? If he called, then I would probably give him permission. Help your friend and then come home. If he didn't call, I would say he broke curfew.